What if the most powerful thing a woman could say is nothing at all? We're taught that our voice is our strength, that we must speak up to be heard. But what if the deepest, most unshakable form of influence comes not from the noise we make, but from the profound silence we learn to command? In a world that screams for our attention, here is a truth most of us have forgotten. The loudest person in the room is often the least powerful. True power isn't about dominating the conversation. It's about mastering the space within yourself so completely that the outside world has no choice but to listen to your silence. Imagine a woman in a room filled with chaos. Voices are raised, emotions are high. She doesn't try to control anyone. She doesn't speak a word. She simply sits with herself in a state of complete stillness. And then something incredible happens. The chaos begins to settle around her. This isn't magic. It's a skill, and it's one of the most unpredictable forces on earth. A woman who learns to sit with herself in silence becomes the most unpredictable force in the room. Not because she intends to dominate or control the narrative, but precisely because she no longer feels the burning need to. In our relentlessly noisy world, silence is profoundly misunderstood. We're conditioned to see it as a void, an emptiness. We mistake it for weakness, for awkwardness, or even for submission. But there is a kind of silence that is not born of suppression, but of the immense, unshakable strength. It is not the silence of fear, but the silence of deep knowing. It is the kind that doesn't beg to be understood, because it has finally, truly understood itself. This profound silence is not the mere absence of words. Far from it. It is the overwhelming presence of awareness. It's that unshakable stillness that settles over you after you stop the exhausting performance of trying to explain your worth to others. It's the deep, resonant peace that enters your heart when you no longer feel compelled to react to every subtle shift in another person's mood. Have you ever felt that? That feeling of letting go of the puppet string someone else was holding? It is the crystal clarity that rises from the depths of your being when your emotional state is no longer dictated by what someone did, or what they failed to say. For generations, most women have been trained to over-express, to over-explain, to always provide context for their boundaries, as if needing to apologize for their own existence. We are taught to fill every empty space with words, with nurturing, with energy, but a profound shift occurs when a woman realizes that her silence, in itself, is the most powerful boundary she can ever erect. When a woman consciously chooses to turn inward, not out of fear or retreat, but as a deliberate act of self-reclamation, she activates a deeper, more primal form of respect. People around her feel it. They may not be able to name it. They may not understand it, but they sense its weight, its gravity, and when you begin focusing on yourself, not in an act of selfishness, but in an act of sacred stillness, you will witness the quiet miracle. Everything that was once misplaced in your life begins gently to fall back into place. When a woman begins this journey of truly focusing on herself, something profound begins to shift. This isn't a small adjustment. It's a tectonic shift in her reality. It's not just happening inside her, but in the entire world around her. This is far more than trendy self-care routines or momentary retreats from the world. It is a deeper awakening. It is a quiet, firm decision to stop pouring your life force, your precious energy, into places, people, and situations that no longer give anything back. It's the sacred act of reclaiming your attention from everything external and redirecting it inward, back to its source. That shift, though it may feel subtle at first, ultimately transforms everything, and it almost always begins with one simple, yet life-altering question: where is my energy truly going? In a world that constantly, shamelessly demands a woman's attention, her nurturing, her care, her emotional labor, her explanations, her compromises, it becomes dangerously easy to forget that your energy is not a limitless, renewable resource. Your attention is the most valuable currency you possess, and how you choose to spend it, moment by moment, determines the entire quality of your emotional and spiritual life. The more you give it away without intention, without discernment, the less you have for your own growth, your own peace, your own dreams. But the moment a woman begins to observe rather than simply react, the moment she chooses herself rather than endlessly chasing others, she starts to plug into a different kind of power. This is not the loud, brittle power that comes from trying to control others. It is the quiet, resilient power that comes from mastering her own inner space. Modern neuroscience has long confirmed this ancient truth. What you focus on grows. This is known as the Hebbian principle, often simplified to the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. Think of your brain as a garden. When your mind is always busy trying to fix people, rehearsing arguments, explaining yourself, predicting negative outcomes, or worrying about how you're perceived, you are strengthening the neural pathways of anxiety and over-responsibility. You are literally carving grooves of stress into your own mind. But when you begin, gently and consistently, to bring your attention back to yourself, to the feeling of your breath, the nature of your thoughts, the truth of your values, the sound of your own stillness, you begin to rewire your brain. You are forging new pathways for clarity, for peace, and for a deep sense of purpose. Take the story of Mina, a woman in her late 50s who had spent the entirety of her adult life beautifully, yet exhaustingly, adjusting herself to the orbits of others. As a devoted mother, a loving wife, and later as a caretaker for her aging parents, she had perfected the art of anticipating needs before they were ever spoken. Her identity was woven from the needs of others, but then her children moved out and her caregiving roles came to a gentle end. She was left with silence, and at first, that silence was terrifying. The constant noise of other people's needs had been her compass for so long that, without it, she felt utterly lost in a vast, empty ocean. But slowly, tentatively, she began to ask the questions she hadn't allowed herself to ask in decades. What do I actually feel when no one is watching me? What do I truly want when I'm not needed by anyone? She started small. She began with morning walks, deliberately leaving her phone at home. She started journaling, not for an audience, but for herself, without editing a single word. She started saying, no to small requests, and she practiced sitting with the guilt until it dissolved, replaced by a quiet hum of self-respect. And as her attention, once scattered in 1,000 directions, returned to its home within herself, something powerful began to emerge. She no longer felt pulled apart. Her conversations became fewer, but more intentional and meaningful. She discovered that she no longer responded to emotional manipulation with long, desperate explanations. She simply met it with calm, unwavering silence, and to her utter surprise, people began to treat her differently, not because she had become loud or demanding, but because she now radiated a self-possession that needed no announcement. She didn't have to ask for respect. She embodied it. You see, focusing on yourself is not an abandonment of others. It is the act of anchoring so deeply within yourself that you can no longer get lost in the storms of others. From this anchored place, you begin to recognize your own patterns with compassionate clarity. You see where you consistently overextend yourself. You notice where you desperately seek validation. You feel the precise moment you betray your own intuition just to keep a fragile peace. And each time you notice, you are given a sacred opportunity, the chance to interrupt the automatic, unconscious cycle. That single moment of noticing is power. It is awareness blossoming into conscious action. There is a sacred discipline in remembering yourself before you remember others. It requires asking, before every yes, whether this decision is rooted in your integrity or in your fear. It means pausing before you react to an injustice, asking yourself, is this truly worth my energy? Does this conflict reflect the person I am becoming? This is not easy, especially for women who have been conditioned for centuries to associate their worth with service, to see silence as weakness, and to interpret setting boundaries as an act of rejection. But the deep, profound truth is that the very opposite is real. The woman who focuses on herself is not selfish. She is self-aware. And self-awareness is the bedrock, the non-negotiable foundation of every single healthy relationship she will ever have with others and with herself. Without it, we end up performing roles instead of being present. We unconsciously absorb the moods of those around us. We mirror their dysfunctions, and we tragically confuse our emotional over-availability with true love. But when we are centered within our own being, we can finally discern between what belongs to us and what belongs to others. We stop taking everything so personally. We stop the exhausting and often arrogant habit of rescuing people from the very lessons their souls are here to learn. One of the most misunderstood and powerful tools on this journey is the conscious practice of silence. I'm not talking about the silence of avoidance or the weaponized silence of passive aggression. I am talking about the silence of presence, a deliberate, grounded quiet that listens more than it speaks, that observes without rushing to intervene, that chooses stillness over the cheap thrill of an unnecessary reaction. In this kind of silence, a woman becomes untouchable, not because she has withdrawn from the world, but because she is finally, unshakably, anchored within it. There is something deeply, almost mysteriously powerful about a woman who does not rush to fill the silence. In an argument, She doesn't need to be louder to be heard. In her relationships, she doesn't over-explain to earn her space. Her calm becomes her clarity, and her silence becomes her boundary. This silence offers something that no amount of speaking ever can: perspective. From a physiological standpoint, silence activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode, which is also responsible for deep insight and healing. When we are constantly reactive, we operate from the sympathetic nervous system, or fight or flight mode, which physically narrows our thinking and clouds our judgment. But silence restores our access to higher thinking, to creativity, and to emotional regulation. It gives us the space to see things for what they are, not what our fears tell us they might be. Jasmine, a mid-career professional in her 40s, discovered this truth the hard way. She was conditioned to defend herself in every conversation, constantly trying to be understood by people who, frankly, had already made up their minds about her. Every time someone questioned her intentions or minimized her emotions, she would jump into the fray with a flurry of explanations, justifications, and counter-arguments. It was utterly draining her, leaving her feeling hollow and defeated, even when she won, until one day, during a heated moment with her partner, she paused. She felt the familiar fire rising in her chest, the words forming on her tongue. But she did something different. She said nothing, not out of resignation, but out of a sudden, piercing awareness. In that instant, she realized that her peace was not up for negotiation. The silence that followed was more powerful than any verbal point she could have ever made. It unsettled her partner, not because she was trying to hurt him, but because for the first time, she did not make herself emotionally available for his conflict. She simply remained present, steady, and calm. That single moment changed the entire dynamic of their relationship. Not overnight, but permanently. He began to listen more carefully. She began to feel truly heard. Not because he had magically changed, but because she had. We often believe that we must speak more to be seen, but sometimes it is in speaking less that we finally become visible for who we truly are. Silence is not the absence of a voice. It is the presence of an undeniable strength. It communicates what words often fail to convey, that you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood, that you no longer fear disconnection because you are so deeply connected within, that your worth is not tied to being agreeable, but to being authentic. There is a deep wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. This wisdom comes not from fear, but from freedom, not from suppression, but from sovereignty. When you no longer use your words as a tool to seek control, you allow life to reveal its truths to you organically. You will be astonished at what happens. People expose themselves in your silence. Their true intentions surface. Their core values become visible. You no longer have to investigate or argue. You just have to observe. And from that place of inner stillness, you begin to make the clearest decisions of your life. In relationships, this practice is especially powerful when a woman focuses on herself and cultivates the discipline of silence. She begins to see the invisible dynamics that were controlling her. She notices with clarity instead of judgment. How some people only know how to connect through chaos. She sees how others expect endless emotional labor from her without ever offering it in return. She recognizes how some conversations are not genuine exchanges, but power struggles in disguise. And most importantly, she sees her own part in co-creating these dynamics, not to blame herself, but to reclaim her responsibility and her power. Every moment of silence becomes a mirror, and what you see in that mirror is not always comfortable. You might notice your patterns of over-explaining, of chasing closure that will never come, or of giving countless second chances out of a deep-seated loneliness. But in seeing him clearly, without judgment, you stop being ruled by them. You begin to act from a place of choice, rather than react from a place of wounding, and that simple shift alone changes everything. This journey does not require you to isolate yourself from the world, but it does demand that you stop abandoning yourself for it. It invites you to slow down long enough to ask the real questions. Who am I without all the noise? What do I value when I'm not performing for an audience? What emotions arise when I'm no longer distracting myself? Silence creates the sacred space for these questions to be answered. It reveals the internal architecture of your life, the values, beliefs, and wounds that subconsciously shape all of your relationships. And once these things are seen, they can be healed, rewritten, and brought into alignment with who you are becoming. One of the most liberating realizations a woman can have is this: not everything requires your energy. Not every message needs an immediate response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be clarified by you. Not every question deserves an answer from you. The moment you truly understand that your presence, your grounded essence, is enough, you begin to conserve your vital energy for what truly matters. This kind of profound self-focus is not a final destination, it is a daily practice. It's a return, again and again, to the present moment, to your breath, to the unshakable truth that you don't have to chase what is meant for you. You attract it by being it. And so, the silence continues, not as an escape from the world, but as a deeper, more meaningful way of engaging with it, with clarity, with discernment, and with grace. A woman who focuses on herself and embraces her silence does not disappear. On the contrary, she becomes more visible than ever before, not in her noise, but in her essence. And the world, you will find, cannot help but rearrange itself around her. A woman who learns to master her emotions is not just in control, she is profoundly free. Free from the heavy chains of overreaction, free from the exhausting cycles of regret, and free from the grip of unconscious patterns that once dictated her every response. This emotional sovereignty is not about being unfeeling or cold. It's the exact opposite. It's about not being owned by every passing feeling. It is the wisdom of knowing that you can feel everything deeply, the joy, the pain, the anger, the love, and still respond wisely. It means you can be hurt and still act from your deepest alignment. You can feel love, grief, anger, and confusion all at once, and still remain grounded in your core values. So many of us are taught to believe that emotions are either something to be expressed impulsively and without filter, or something to be suppressed and hidden away entirely. But both of these extremes lead to a state of profound inner imbalance. One makes you a slave to your reactions, tossed about by every emotional wave. The other disconnects you from the wisdom of your own heart. True emotional power lies in the sacred space between impulse and stillness. It is the cultivated, practiced ability to feel everything fully, and yet not be consumed by anything. There is a powerful teaching from ancient Eastern traditions that says, control your breath, and you control your life. And indeed, modern neuroscience wholeheartedly agrees. When a woman pauses and takes a single, conscious breath before responding to a provocation, a biological miracle occurs. Her brain activity shifts from the amygdala, the primitive, reactive part of the brain where emotional reactivity is born, to the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, reflection, and higher wisdom. This isn't just spiritual advice. It is a biological reality you can leverage at any moment. Consider the story of Alia, a woman who for years was known for her fire. She was brilliant, passionate, and quick. When someone crossed a line, she met them with a matching intensity. Her voice would rise, her heart would race. She fought back with words, proving her intelligence, her sharpness, her absolute refusal to be disrespected. But each time, even when she won the argument, she would walk away feeling utterly drained and strangely empty. She began to realize that her reactions, while often justified, were costing her far more than the original offense ever could. They were costing her her peace, her power, her clarity. One day, during a tense conversation with a colleague who had openly undermined her work in a meeting, she felt that familiar heat rising in her chest, the fierce urge to respond immediately, to defend her honor, to correct the record. But something in her, a new awareness, shifted. She inhaled slowly, and instead of launching a verbal attack, she simply paused. She looked directly at him, and she said nothing. That pause, which lasted only a few seconds, was not empty. It was full. It was full of restraint, full of grounded energy, full of quiet, unshakable power. And in that pause, she realized something life-changing. The desperate need to prove yourself is almost always born from the fear of being unseen. But when you know your own worth, you no longer feel the need to perform it for others. You simply hold it quietly, and the world learns to feel it without ever being told. That pause gave her the precious time to assess the situation from her prefrontal cortex, not her amygdala. Was this conflict truly worth her emotional investment? Did this person really have the power to define her value? The answer was a clear and resounding no. She eventually responded to him with calm, clear boundaries, spoken not from a raging fire, but from a solid foundation, and the result was astounding. He backed down, not because she was aggressive, but because she was anchored. In that moment, she had stepped fully into her emotional sovereignty. To be emotionally sovereign means that your inner state is no longer at the mercy of other people's moods, decisions, or expectations. You stop outsourcing your peace of mind. You stop making yourself available for every emotional tug of war you were invited to. You don't become cold, you become incredibly clear, and this clarity acts as a shield, protecting you from the exhausting trap of endless reaction. Every single time you react without reflection, you are giving your power away. You are literally letting someone else set the rhythm of your own nervous system. But when you pause, when you breathe, when you choose your response instead of letting a reaction choose you, you reclaim authorship over your inner world. This skill is especially vital in our most intimate relationships, where our emotional triggers are most deeply rooted. Partners often unconsciously mirror each other's deepest wounds. One person's insecurity can feed the other's defensiveness. One's anxious need for reassurance can trigger the other's need for space. One's need for control collides head-on with the other's need for freedom. Without emotional sovereignty, these dynamics spiral endlessly into conflict, misunderstanding, and deep resentment. But with awareness, these very same trigger points become portals for profound healing and growth. Sophia, a woman in her late 30s, once described how nearly every argument with her partner would end in her crying, shouting, or storming away in anger. She was trapped in a painful loop, a trigger, an explosion of feeling, and a wake of regret. She felt unheard, invalidated, and emotionally exhausted, like a passenger in her own emotional life. But as she began a simple, daily practice of breathwork and emotional journaling, something remarkable began to change within her. What Sophia began to discover, through these simple yet consistent practices, was a way to step out of the passenger seat and into the driver's seat of her own life. Her journey from emotional reactivity to sovereign response is not just inspiring, it is a practical roadmap. And as we'll explore next, it all begins with learning to understand the hidden language of our own triggers and the incredible power that is unlocked when we finally stop fighting them. In our last segment, we left Sophia at a crucial turning point. Trapped in a painful loop of emotional reactivity and regret, she realized that to change her relationships, she first had to change her relationship with her own reactions. This is where theory ends and true practice begins. The very next time conflict arose, she felt it coming. It was a familiar, venomous cocktail of sensations: the tightening in her chest, the sharp clenching of her jaw, the sudden, shallow quickening of her breath. Her body was preparing for a war she no longer wanted to fight. But this time, instead of allowing the wave of reaction to crash over her, she did something revolutionary. She simply said, "Give me a moment." She stepped away. This wasn't a retreat. It was a pilgrimage, a short, sacred journey back to herself. In the quiet of another room, she sat down, she breathed, not just shallow, panicked breaths, but deep, grounding breaths that reached down into her belly. And in that self-created sanctuary, she asked herself not just what she was feeling, but why she was feeling it so intensely. Was this storm truly about what her partner had just said, or was it about something much deeper, a wound from her past that had been touched? When she returned to the conversation, she spoke not from the chaotic winds of the storm, but from the calm, clear eye at its center. The conversation that followed was the first they'd had in months, perhaps years. That didn't end in the wreckage of emotional chaos. It wasn't perfect. The issue wasn't magically solved. But for the first time, it was present. They were no longer two storms colliding, but two people calmly looking at a map together. Emotional sovereignty is never achieved by force. It cannot be willed into existence overnight. It is practiced, moment by moment, through daily, devoted attention. It is built through the quiet habit of awareness, through the uncomfortable yet liberating discipline of self-honesty. It is cultivated in those small, unseen moments when no one is watching, where you choose to observe an emotion rather than indulge its dramatic narrative, where you choose to breathe instead of blame, where you choose to inquire with curiosity instead of accuse with certainty. And this kind of presence doesn't just benefit your relationships with others. Its most profound gift is how it deepens the relationship you have with yourself. You begin, slowly but surely, to trust yourself more. You stop second-guessing every decision, agonizing over every choice. You no longer need to crowdsource your self-worth or use another person's laugh as fragile proof of your own value. You begin to carry yourself with a quiet, unshakable assurance. It's a presence that radiates a silent message. I know who I am. I know what I feel. And I will no longer abandon myself for the temporary comforts of approval or the illusion of peace. This inner mastery leads naturally, inevitably, into another kind of transformation, the power of embodied stillness. A woman's emotional sovereignty doesn't just radiate through her words, or her powerful lack of them. It speaks even more loudly through her very presence, through how she moves, how she sits, how she breathes, how she listens, and most importantly, how she holds herself when no one else is holding her. Your body is not just a vessel you inhabit, it is a language. It is broadcasting a signal 24/7. And it tells others how to treat you long before you ever speak a word. Your posture, your tone of voice, your eye contact, these are not just superficial social cues, they are energetic signatures. They communicate to the world whether you are grounded or scattered, open or guarded, calm or reactive. When a woman walks into a room with this embodied presence, she does not have to announce her strength. It is simply felt. It is not the kind of presence that loudly demands attention. It is the kind of presence that quietly holds attention. And this doesn't come from performing confidence. It comes from cultivating deep inner alignment. Imagine Maya, a soft-spoken woman who was consistently overlooked in her work meetings. Her ideas were brilliant, but they would die in the air, starved of the oxygen of conviction her body failed to provide. She would present them hesitantly, her eyes cast downward, her voice slow, her shoulders slightly hunched as if to apologize for taking up space. She didn't realize her body was screaming doubt even when her words were clear. After attending a somatic awareness workshop, she began a new, simple habit. Each morning, she would stand barefoot in her room for just 5 minutes, breathing deeply into her core, consciously rolling her shoulders back, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet. This wasn't about puffing up her chest in a fake display of power. It was about returning to herself, about fully inhabiting the physical space she rightfully occupied. Over weeks, The shift was undeniable. She wasn't trying to be someone else. She was becoming more fully herself. Her voice grew steadier, resonating from her core. Her presence in a room seemed to expand. The next time she spoke in a meeting, people listened, not because she shouted, but because she spoke from her center, and her entire body confirmed the truth of her words. I believe in what I am saying. And because she believed, others did too. This is the unseen power of embodied stillness. You don't have to yell to be heard. You don't have to push to be taken seriously. You simply have to be aligned, internally and externally. Practices like breath work, mindful posture, and moments of stillness are not just wellness trends. They are foundational, non-negotiable practices for women who want to move through the world with clarity, grace, and unshakable respect. The breath, especially, is a superpower we almost always overlook. It is the physical bridge between your mind and your body, between thought and action, between a knee-jerk reaction and a wise response. In moments of intense emotional overwhelm, one deep, intentional breath can change the entire trajectory of a conversation, a decision, or even a relationship. This practice literally rewires your body's stress response. It sends a direct message to your nervous system, saying, I am safe, I am here, I can respond with wisdom. Over time, this rewiring becomes your default setting. You are no longer a boat tossed about by the chaotic waves outside of you. You move from your center, and that center becomes your compass, especially when others try to pull you into storms you did not create. Embodied stillness also teaches you a lost art, patience. In a world that worships urgency and immediacy, a woman who moves slowly, who responds only after reflection, who doesn't rush to fix, explain, or apologize, becomes a quiet mystery, not because she is hiding herself, but because she reveals herself only when it is aligned. Her yes is clear and wholehearted. Her no is unwavering and complete. Her time is sacred. This kind of presence doesn't push people away. It invites truth. It creates a relational field where only authenticity can survive. People can feel when you are truly present with them. Not just physically but energetically. They feel safer around you, not because you cater to their every need, but because they sense you are not at war with yourself. And this, in turn, creates profound emotional safety in your relationships. When your presence is grounded, your partner no longer feels the exhausting pressure to guess your mood, manage your triggers, or decode your reactions. You create a space of emotional predictability, not by being passive, but by being internally consistent. Children, too, are exquisitely sensitive to this. A mother who is emotionally sovereign and embodied teaches her children not through her words of advice, but through her very way of being. She models what it means to be present in discomfort, to pause in conflict, to breathe through overwhelm, and that quiet example becomes a precious inheritance, more valuable than anything she could ever say. To live in this way requires intention. It is not our automatic setting. It must be cultivated day after day, but the reward is immeasurable. Your relationships evolve, your decisions clarify, your energy deepens. You become a quiet force, not for domination, but for peace, not for attention, but for alignment, not to prove anything, but simply to be, and in that authentic state of being. Others are moved not by what you do, but by who you are, because you are no longer just reacting to life, you are responding to it from a place of deep inner truth. And that truth becomes the most powerful, resonant, and beautiful thing in any room. Every woman carries within her a rhythm, an energy, a signal that precedes her words and even her actions. Before she speaks, before she responds, even before she enters a room, there is a kind of transmission that takes place. It is subtle, but it is unmistakable. It is her emotional frequency. And the profound truth is, people don't just hear what you say, they feel who you are. There is a concept called the mirror effect, which teaches this, that our external world, especially our relationships, are often reflections of our internal state. What we carry inside, we end up projecting and perceiving outward. What we avoid healing internally often manifests externally in the people we attract or repel. In the conflicts we repeat, in the silences we endure, and even in the kind of love we believe we are worthy of accepting. When there is inner disorder, unresolved grief, buried anger, deep self-doubt, chaos seems to find us, no matter how much we run from it. But when there is inner peace, the world around us begins to quiet down, not because the world itself has changed, but because our relationship with it has transformed. Imagine a woman who carries unresolved grief in her heart. She may look composed, even smile beautifully in public, but her frequency speaks of a deep heaviness. Without realizing it, she may find herself attracting partners who are emotionally unavailable, mirroring back to her the very disconnect she holds within herself. Or think of a woman filled with a quiet hum of self-doubt. She may speak words of affirmation, but her energy subtly communicates hesitation, and so she finds herself again and again in dynamics where her boundaries are tested. Her voice is overlooked, and her confidence is questioned. Let's be clear. This is not about blaming yourself for the actions of others. It is about empowering yourself by understanding the resonant patterns in your life. The mirror effect is not a punishment. It is a revelation. Life, through the people it brings us, keeps showing us what we still need to address within ourselves. When you begin to center yourself in your truth, not in performance, not in fear, but in unwavering truth, everything around you becomes clearer, not necessarily easier, but clearer. A woman once shared how she kept ending up in relationships where she felt profoundly used. Every man she dated seemed charming at first, but would eventually become cold, controlling, or indifferent. For years, she blamed them. Then, she blamed herself. But after a long period of deep reflection, she realized she was operating from a subconscious belief that her worth was transactional, that love had to be earned through relentless efforts. She was over-giving, over-explaining, and overextending herself in the desperate hope of receiving mere scraps of affection. Her energy was screaming, "Please see me," even when her words insisted, "I'm fine." When she finally stopped trying to fix others and turned that healing energy inward, everything changed. She began to sit in silence more often, to listen to the rhythm of her own breath, to compassionately observe her own emotional patterns without judgment. She stopped trying so hard to be liked and focused instead on being honest with herself. She didn't rush into intimacy. She observed people slowly, allowing their character to reveal itself over time. And she realized something profound. When she became emotionally consistent and respectful with herself, manipulative people no longer knew how to engage with her. She stopped attracting chaos because there was no chaos within her for it to resonate with. Her stillness began to act as a powerful filter. The mirror effect doesn't just reveal what is broken, it reveals what is possible. When your internal world is ordered, aligned, and nourished, your relationships will organically become reflections of that harmony. It's not magic, it's resonance. We draw people into our lives who vibrate at a similar emotional level. And as we raise our own frequency, not by pretending, but by genuinely healing, our entire environment begins to shift. People begin to respect your silence because they can feel it isn't empty, it's intentional. They feel your no with respect. Even before you say it, they feel your joy, not because you display it loudly, but because it genuinely lives in you. You begin to understand that being centered is the greatest protection you can ever have. It shields you not with high walls, but with an unwavering presence. This is why inner work is not a luxury. It is the absolute foundation. The woman who invests in her internal world, the one who bravely examines her stories, clears her energy, and returns to herself again and again, builds a life that cannot help but reflect peace. She no longer begs for connection. She becomes connection. She no longer performs for love. She embodies love, and from that state of embodiment, she attracts those who are truly ready to meet her there, not just in romance, but in friendship, in family, and in community. This inner alignment requires discipline. It means choosing to pause before reacting. Every single time, it means being willing to walk away from what disrupts your peace. Even if it's painfully familiar, it means being willing to feel uncomfortable truths rather than escaping into easy distractions. But the reward is a clarity so profound it changes everything. You begin to trust yourself implicitly. You stop second-guessing your instincts. You no longer tolerate energy that drains you, because you are finally too aligned with your own soul to pretend anymore. Even in solitude, you feel deeply connected, because you are no longer seeking from the outside world what you have finally learned to generate from within. That shift is everything. It's the difference between chasing and attracting, between noise and resonance, between being pulled in 1,000 directions and standing firmly, peacefully, in one. Still, life will always have a way of testing this newfound stillness. There will always be people who don't understand your silence, who feel threatened by your presence, who try to pull you back into old, chaotic patterns. And in those moments, you are faced with a sacred choice: contract to make others comfortable, or expand to remain true to yourself. Sometimes, the most powerful and loving move you can make is to pull back. Not in resentment, but in realignment. This is what we call strategic withdrawal. It is the conscious, sober decision to step back, to observe, and to allow the truth of a situation to reveal itself, not through force or confrontation, but through distance. There's an old saying, when you stop speaking, people reveal who they are. This is not just a poetic idea. It is a profound psychological reality. When you stop feeding a dynamic with your energy, you expose its true nature. When you stop explaining yourself, you discover who truly seeks to understand you. When you stop initiating contact, you find out who values the connection enough to reach for you. Distance has its own language, and silence has its own kind of clarity. Strategic withdrawal is not about ghosting or playing manipulative games. It is about reclaiming your precious emotional energy from places where it is being wasted. It is about giving yourself the space to see things as they truly are, not as you desperately wish them to be. So often, we stay too long in situations because we are addicted to a person's potential. We see what someone could be, and in doing so, we ignore who they are showing us they are right now. But potential is not a promise, and silence allows us to stop projecting our hopes and start perceiving reality. The mirror had been in an on-again, off-again relationship for years. She had finally chosen silence, not out of bitterness, but out of complete exhaustion and newfound wisdom. She had tried everything: heartfelt talks, long letters, counseling, endless compromises, but the painful cycle continued. Each time she explained her needs, they were temporarily acknowledged, but never consistently respected. So one day, she simply stopped explaining. She didn't issue an ultimatum. She didn't start a final argument. She just became quiet. That silence became her ultimate boundary. And in that quiet space, for the first time in years, she could finally hear her own voice again. Not the anxious, pleading voice that said, "Just make it work," but the deeper, calmer voice that whispered, "Let it go." Within weeks, the undeniable truth of the relationship became crystal clear, not because he changed, but because her perception did. And from that clarity, she finally found peace. Withdrawal is not weakness. It is wisdom in action. It allows the energy between people to recalibrate. It reveals who is willing to meet you where you are. It filters out all the noise so you can finally hear your own intuition. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches you the liberating truth that you are not responsible for carrying any relationship alone. A woman who knows when to withdraw is a woman who knows her worth. She is not afraid of being alone, because she is no longer lonely within herself. She doesn't fear silence, because silence is the sacred space where she hears her truth most clearly. She doesn't chase for answers, because she knows the right questions will always bring the answers to her in time. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to force outcomes. You begin to trust the natural unfolding of life. You begin to notice just how much energy you used to waste trying to make others see, make them care, make them stay. And in letting go of that struggle, you reclaim all of that precious energy for your own growth, your own healing, your own joy. Some people will call this selfish. Let them. They have never tasted the kind of profound self-respect that comes from refusing to betray yourself. Others may call you distant, but what they are really feeling is your energetic boundary, the space around you that you now protect like sacred ground. When you withdraw, not as punishment, but as protection, you allow space for clarity to breathe, and clarity is what guides all wise action. It tells you when to stay, when to go, when to speak, and when to let your silence do the talking. It teaches you that your presence is not something to be offered lightly. It is a gift, it is a sacred force, and it must be given only where it is valued. The woman who practices strategic withdrawal becomes magnetic, not because she is playing a mysterious game, but because she is whole. People are drawn to her stillness, her integrity, her quiet strength, but not everyone will be ready for it. And that's okay, because she no longer lives to be understood by everyone. She lives to be true to herself. And from that unwavering truth, everything else in her life begins to align, not always immediately, not always without challenge, but always with purpose, because life itself supports those who walk in alignment. It clears paths for the woman who is brave enough to walk alone when needed, and wise enough to know when it's time to return. This is the silent wisdom that speaks louder than noise, the quiet presence that echoes longer than any performance, and the deep, abiding calm that, once chosen, will never truly leave you again. When a woman chooses to focus on herself and embraces her silence, not as absence, but as deep intention, her life begins to shift in the most profound ways. Not because she forces change upon the world, but because she becomes the change. She no longer reacts from old wounds, but responds from a place of inner wisdom. She doesn't need to beg to be heard, because her stillness speaks volumes for her. She no longer pours her life force into things that deplete her. She reserves her sacred energy for what aligns with her growth, her peace, and her truth. This journey is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is quiet, it is steady, and it is the most powerful thing you will ever do. Through this practice, you learn to see beyond appearances, to feel the energy behind the words, and to walk away from noise that disguises itself as love. Your presence becomes your statement. Your boundaries become your protection. Your silence becomes your filter. And slowly, miraculously, the world around you begins to mirror the world you have so carefully cultivated within. Relationships become more respectful. Opportunities arise without chasing. Clarity replaces confusion. This is not because you fixed everything and everyone around you. It is because you finally mastered what was within you. The woman who learns to be still, to be present, to be centered in her own truth. She is no longer available for anything less than what she knows she deserves. In her silence, everything unnecessary simply falls away, and in that beautiful, clear space, everything that is truly meant for her finally finds its way home. If this message resonated with the truth you hold within, this is your invitation to join our community. This is a space dedicated to quiet strength, deep wisdom, and the journey back to ourselves. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications, not to add more noise to your life, but to receive a reminder, a gentle anchor for your journey inward. Share this video with a woman in your life who might need to hear this message today. Let's walk this path of awakening together. Thank you for being here.